Welcome back to Radical Engagements. As you can see, it's been a little while since I've recorded one of these. The reasons for that are multifarious, but we're going to pick back up with Alasdair MacIntyre from Alasdair MacIntyre's Engagements in Marxism by Haymarket Brill. I believe this was published, let me see here, in 2006. And we were talking about a 1970 essay originally published in an E.P. Thompson edited edition out of Apathy in London in 1960. All long times ago. Alasdair MacIntyre is still alive, and he's still one of my favorite Catholic thinkers. And we'll be doing some stuff on him like I'm doing with Lash on the regular. So expect some guests to come on and talk about MacIntyre with me. But we can finish the first two sections. We are now in the third section of what is chapter 14 in this book. But remember, this is compiled essays. Section 3. Absorbed in money-making and in the peaceful warfare of competition, it is bourgeois society that forgot, those brackets are put in by the author, the shades of ancient Rome had sat beside its cradle. Marx, 1973, page 48. That's annotated. It wasn't annotated, the original one here. And what essay is that from? Well, let us look. That is from Capital Volume 2. All right. So, Marx, but how did the bourgeoisie come to forget? For nascent bourgeois society, the Greco-Roman world provided the mantle which human values wear. This is me talking. We can see here the way bourgeois society calls back to early modern or late medieval society and what we call the Renaissance as a time period of its birth. And that has to do specifically with certain classical disciplines. The whole idea of classics and classical philology and English literature all really begins as part of this project, and it's codified in the university in the 18th and 19th century and into the early 20th century. It's actually a fairly modern thing. But we can see this kind of need to pull back to the past. I mean, Marx makes reference to this all the time. He makes reference to it in the Brumaire as well. Let us go back to this. The Greco-Roman world provided the mantle which human values wear, and this not only on the battlefields and amidst the terror which brought society into being, but also in its academic syllabuses. The prototype of all arts disciplines, as they exist in our universities today, is the Great School at Oxford. And the Great School, in its inception, was a study of a whole society, of the language, literature, and history and philosophy of, quote, Greco-Roman culture. The quote there added by me, it's not in the original text. I kind of think Greco-Roman culture is an overstated similarity, kind of like Judeo-Christian culture. But anyway, back to the text. The small scale and the physical size of that culture, its relatively self-contained character, made it a suitable object for study. It was a model for social behavior. Lord Milner's young men building the modern empire, the Aquitanian liberals, these in their own way echo Thucydides and Cicero. But from early on, the school tends towards becoming a group of separate disciplines. The vision of a whole society, inaccurate as it may have been, is lost. Language and literature, history and philosophy, it becomes a model for the fragmented disciplines of modern civic universities. And this leads to great misunderstandings. If you've ever listened to the podcast, The Secret History of Western Esotericism, which is really about all the religious notions that are buried into Hellenistic philosophy, one of the reasons why we don't study that in its initial, like, full-scale orientation is because basically from the great school at Oxford forward, there's a tendency, once the disciplines are founded in fragment, to want to view Plato or Aristotle or the pre-Socratics as part of natural philosophy or as part of something that is secular, and applying that rubric of secularity back into a time where it did not exist. Back into MacIntyre. Anglo-Saxon is deliberately introduced to parallel the linguistic demands of classical studies, and what happens in these fragmented disciplines in both older and newer universities is that the great many specimens of human culture are inspected without any connection being established, which would bring out what it was in any way to be a part of human culture or society. There is lacking any conception of the human as such, in terms of which relations between history and literature and philosophy might be established. To do a course in one of these subjects is usually like going around a museum. Exhibits are neatly labeled, and you, the spectator, stand outside of the case. But you can think of any connection between them and you only by imagining yourself dead and stuffed under glass. For the alternative is seeing the exhibits as living as you are living, having never been opened to you by the demonstration of any vital connection between yourself and them. Such a connection could only be established by a concept of common human nature. And to serve its purpose, such a concept would have to be historical, have to have the means of showing the past growing into the present. Marxism possesses such a concept. Why it has not been fruitfully in the British academic life, we shall have to ask presently. But for a moment, this is to rush ahead of the argument. What does matter is simply the divorce of art subjects from the study of human society as such. I'm going to put a note here. I mentioned Frederick Besser a lot, and I know some of my audience has pushed back on me for over-recommending him. For example, when I talked about the German Historicist School, his study of the German Historicist does exactly what we're talking about here. Besser separates out the German Historical School of Economics from the German Historical School of Philosophy, and you can't really do that and understand either. The fragmentations into disciplines in Germany was similar to the fragmentation into disciplines in England in a slightly later time period. But in the book after Hegel, Friedrich Besser actually describes how that happens and how the intervention of the Prussian state and the need for clear course consistency and clear subject delineation and more specialization actually required the development of a parallel system in the Prussian academy, similar to what had happened in the English university system. This is actually useful for understanding this tendency as trying to understand a whole society, the way MacIntyre is wanting to ask us to envision both a society in the bourgeois totality and the society in the ancient Roman totality, is to also take into yourself and really think about and deal with the way in which the complexity of those requires fragmentation. But by fragmenting these things apart under the analytic knife, we no longer see ourselves as extensions related to them. And I wouldn't just say we need to do this with, quote, Greco-Roman society. I think we should do it with all of them. We should not see ourselves as fundamentally separated from the studies of, say, the Nawa, or the Mexica, or the Maya, or the ancient Indus Valley peoples, or the Indo-European cultures, etc. Different things are brought out and different things are taken back in. This is the promise of a book like David Graeber's The Dawn of Everything, a book that I actually think decontextualizes so much that it may do more damage than good, even though it asks us such questions. Let us begin. I am tempted to bring in something that one of the teachers at the member school actually talks about a lot. But when we deal with anthropology, you have to remember that a lot of times anthropology is anthropologists explaining themselves through the lens of other cultures without acknowledging that's what they're doing, and thus creating both an insider extension and an outsider extension, a kind of double view. All right. We don't want to do that. We want to acknowledge that the historical instantiation is different, but that there's a human subject that is somewhat understandable, comprehensible because of biological similarities, etc. The lack of unity in art subjects makes them all the more open to the victimization by administrative pressure. And oh boy, does MacIntyre have no idea what's coming writing this in 1960. The beginning of the quote multiversity era and the expansion of the university, the administrative pressure was only going to amp up, particularly starting in the late 1980s and then exploding in the aughts. But let us get back to the text at hand. It's hard to hold a man accountable for something that he wrote 60 years ago as a young man. And remember that MacIntyre is almost 100 years old. The man will not die. All right. We just hope that he at least lives longer than Kissinger. Anyway. On the other hand, there's a pressure to produce more scientists and technologists and the consequent building programs. On the other hand, there's a general expansion inside the universities with very little, if any, thought to what the purpose of the arts faculty may be, which is why it gets cut so much. The universities design their courses either to produce a kind of trained scientist that industry and government demand, or to produce a kind of arts graduate, and I think here the vast mass of those middling ability, not of a few more distinguished, that nobody demands at all. The content of science courses is almost entirely non-problematic. See my stuff back about a year ago on the book by Jeff Smith, Disciplined Minds, which actually says it's not actually non-problematic, but it's not obvious. How to get enough of the required subject matter into 3 years. Teaching is the limit of the problem. 4 years in our case. The content of arts courses is almost entirely problematic, and our only firm criterion is that it has been done in the past. And that's not even a criterion anymore. That last bit's me. In this situation, the examination system and the task which imposes becomes the limit of the academic vision for many. About the ends of what one is doing, no questions are asked. In the sciences, because decisions about ends have been taken by powers outside of universities. In the arts, because there is no accepted and effective standard by which a decision could be made. Thus, all discussion is about means. The university teacher is turned into an administrator who can accept the framework imposed from elsewhere, from industry and government in the sciences, from the past in the arts, and the administrators are notoriously conservative. Quote, even liberal administrators who share liberal values are conservative in the way they administer and maintain those liberal values, which is why there's so much backlash against them. Their criteria have to be those of efficiency in producing the given results. Theirs is not the reason why, but only how. It's interesting here. We've gotten from a section where he's talking about how bourgeois society lost its connection to Greco-Roman society. A question, by the way, that boggles my mind. The whole show, No Royal Road, that I do with the regrettable brothers, Chris and Jason, is totally based on me asking that question over and over and over again. Why is it that since bourgeois society saw itself as hearkening back, not to Protestant society or Jewish society as was proposed by Max Weber in the Protestant case, Werner Sombart in the Jewish case, but or to Christendom, but to Renaissance and Roman society and Greco-Roman composite society as a whole, however poorly conceived as it was in the beginnings of the early modern period. Why is that the case? So the universities have a few answers to offer to their students when they ask why they should do what they do. They have to fall back onto extremes. Either disciplined study is worthwhile because of the sheer value of the experience in itself, or the professional training, which has its end getting of a certain job, or it combines these. Which is funny. He's saying this in 1960. I've been complaining about this dual mission that doesn't make any sense for 20 years about the academia and universities. Part of why I left it. And yet, it's been clear since the modern university began to take place in the 1940s and 50s that this was going to be a problem. And as it expanded throughout society, its expansion and the carteling and credentialization of areas of life that were priorly not cartelled or credentialized is probably why things like PMC theory are so appealing. PMC theory is a theory of elites, but it's also a theory of cartelization. And what Aaron Reich noticed is those two things were separating out in the late 1990s. I'll give her credit for that. When it was picked back up, that split was ignored, or if it is talked about, it's talked about by people like Michael Lind, who are Peter Turchin, whose politics are not mine, but whose analysis I think is actually fairly good on what's going on there. Anyway, back to MacIntyre again. The first answer sounds idealistic, is that in the first answer, which sounds idealistic, is in fact cynical, because everyone knows, although few will admit, how few worthwhile intellectual experiences the mass of students encounter in a university career. It knows. Absolutely true. We all say that university, but most of what the university does is not actually worthwhile intellectual encounters. I've had some better intellectual encounters with private conversations with my professors afterwards, which were made by that, or by listening to a good NPR show. And I don't even like National Public Radio, that liberal mid-cult gobbledygook. So it depends, right? I think academia opened doors for me, but it was not the classes themselves or the university experience itself that really became the mainstay of the thing that drove me personally. All right. The best students are different here, but they would mostly achieve what they achieve anyway. One is sometimes tempted to think that the only students with whom the university teacher does not largely fail are those for whom he is largely superfluous. I felt that. That's why I quit. The second answer, which sounds cynical, is in fact idealistic. At least for art students, because they are not in fact being trained to do anything except to teach other subjects which will land them in the same predicament. Unless, that is, they too, like scientists, become servants of great corporations. The editors of the Times Educational Supplement have said recently, remember this is in the 1960s, actually 1960s, this is late 50s probably, it can still be maintained that the classics for pure educational value are standing amongst all other subjects. Greats at Oxford, which is the crown of classical education, still produces men and women with minds ideally prepared for work in the world. Why do we recruit first in the greats? A former chairman of the great oil company once asked. Because they sell more oil, he replied. What I have tried to depict in this section is an academic scene in which the breakdown of an admittedly inadequate norm of classical education had left the academic world without any inner strength to resist the molding pressures of industry and the state. Think back to, this is me talking again, think back to my discussions on Christopher Lasch on education, and you can see how this is the case. The university assumes the shape of the social status quo. So does the university teacher. Except right now. Now it assumes one of two very opposed status quos. And we can get into that. A product of the system which now he helps to administer. He can hardly avoid sharing the mood which I have described in this first section of this essay. Himself, without the initiative or much room to maneuver, becomes an admirable representative of a conforming society. As a supporter of the dominant ideas in our culture, he is gradually transformed into a trustworthy guardian of our society's ideology. Thus, the concepts of reason and freedom are not even a temptation to him. To use the word ideology here may seem to give a discussion a quaint continental flavor. European intellectuals have ideologies. Crocation, Marxist, existentialist, or whatever it is. We British, and consequently we Americans, so refrain from runs, are less pretentious, less hospitable to these inflamed general theories. And thus the immediate reaction, if one, of course, is to be characterized not just in terms of our various professed doctrines and theories, but in terms of the absence of general theories and unifying ideas. Cough, cough. The problems with analytical philosophy. Cough, cough. I like analytical philosophy, but it is not unified. It has a hard time dealing with time. In particular, as I am going to repeat to the point of weariness, we lack a unifying concept of human possibility. This is, of course, to say that the key point in our intellectual failure is in the human sciences. It is what has happened to psychology, sociology, and history that we need to turn. And now we need to pass beyond the patterns of administrative pressure. Certainly the human sciences, too, have been fragmented, are becoming one hand abstract academic industries, and on the other hand being turned into training schools for personnel managers and almoners. I don't know what that word means. I'm going to look it up. This is rare that I encounter a word that I don't actually use. All right. Almoners. An almoner is an official distributor of alms. This is MacIntyre talking some shit. All right. But in the depths of our dilemma lies not in the way that they have been presented, but in the way but in what there has been to present. To approach the topic is to reach the heart of the matter. Now, I've been droning on in addition to these 3 pages of this essay, and we're going to go through all of it because I think it gives you a flavor for what MacIntyre's engagement of Marxism was about, his particular character, why it matters. And he's up there with Geist and one of these thinkers that I think really influenced me, who's hard to put on the political spectrum. As a recent article came out who pitted him against Rorty and the author side of Rorty, but it was a good reminder that even as a Aquanian Catholic, that MacIntyre thought that maybe hanging the rich was a good idea. So it's something to think about when you deal with Alasdair MacIntyre. He is a Marxist turned Catholic, and he still talks fairly highly of Marxism in a way that many of the other people of this era do not, particularly people who turned in the 70s and 80s to post-Marxism or post-Marxist pragmatism, bourgeois liberalism, etc. All right. I'm going to be doing more on both MacIntyre and Goyce, and Raymond Goyce for you in Radical Engagements, and maybe a little bit more Lash. I have been slowly actually keeping my promise for real this time to slow down production. There's still plenty behind the Patreon wall, and there'll still be 2 or 3 episodes on the channel a week and 6 minimum episodes released on the free podcast per month. And in fact, I have some podcast only episodes coming in on Patreon and to the public, probably by the time this airs. But you will notice over the summer that I'm slowing down. I've taken more responsibilities at my day job, and I am writing again, both on poetry and on Christopher Lash, which is something I've been threatening to do for 4 years, to start my lash book. So expect to see a regular clip. Plus, I still do White Guy Wednesdays over at TIR. I need to take care of some Patreon business. So this is for the month of May when I say this. So May patrons, I'm getting to you. My Kano Kohanens, I need to announce you. These are my $10 patrons, and they can sometimes get all kinds of things. Sometimes they do shows with me, etc. So my patron this month is Callisto L, who is a longtime friend of mine. I'll just admit that. And he will be actually doing a commission show on the Patreon side sometime in the next 3 months on caudillos and their effect on Latin American politics, both left and right. So if you want to have a chance to commission that sort of thing, get special access, help me get guests on, get listened to, becoming a Kano Kohanen is a way to do that. But you are always welcome on the Patreon. Almost all audio is available for $3. There's a bunch more stuff you can get, more videos. They're like this. I don't do a whole lot of production, but etc. So if you're interested, you can sign up to the Patreon. You can find it in the show notes, etc. And I'd appreciate the support. I understand that we might be dealing with economically hard times, though. So if you just hear this and want to continue sharing, I'm a non-monetized YouTube channel. Organic sharing is great. I don't get prioritized in the algorithm. So organic sharing really helps me. Comments, I may comment back to you, etc. I really appreciate it. So like and subscribe, hit the bell when you want to know when these comes out. That really helps. Have a great day. And you can find the link to the first video and the citation for the book that I'm pulling this from in the show notes as well.